Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Marr, and today's lesson is going to be about making a mug. This particular type of mug is going to be a cylinder, and we're going to use a slab to make it. So, as we've learned over the last couple lessons, we're going to reuse some of the things that we've talked about. So I'm going to kind of move right along and skip some of the sections that I know we've already talked about. The thing is, we're going to use a slab, and we've talked about how you do a slab using the sticks and the rolling pin to get the thickness right. This is not the stick I use, this is a thicker stick. So I've already rolled this out to save time. Some of the criteria for this project for you guys will be to include a theme on your mug and have the handle incorporate that theme. There are lots of different ways to get a handle. I'm going to actually attach a video to my assignment that shows you a bunch of different ways to make a handle. So that won't be part of this one. I already kind of pre-made one for this. The other thing is we're going to use additive and reductive techniques. We've already gone over that when we did the mask making. So I was blessed with a bunch of half-done mugs when we all decided last March not to come back. So I'm just going to show you some examples of that since we've already been over additive and reductive. So some of the things to think about. We have a slab here. We are going to, first of all, you're going to flip. We've talked about that in the past. You're going to flip it every once in a while and roll it out. Make sure that it's an even thickness. The trick to the mug is that we want to do a base, and from the base we are going to do a wall. So I know that my base is going to be 4 inches across. That's important to know because we need to figure out how long to make the slab in order to make the wall for the mug. And having said that, we also need to make sure that we've rolled out enough clay to do that. You don't want to have to patch it piece by piece. So I know, because I did it in advance, that I've got a 4-inch base. Sorry, I just lost my pin tool. I was in a panic. Okay, and I'm going to carve out the base. You do not want to press. I'm using just a lid. We have a million lids in different sizes in there, so just measure the one you want. I'm using a pin tool to cut it out. Don't press too hard or it's just going to be hard to get it out of there. Okay, so you just want to lay it on top. You could just draw it with the pin tool, although we do not, as a rule, in the end result, draw with pin tools. And I'm making this a little thick just to prove my point and show you guys. And because it's the first one you've done, that'll help. This clay is very wet. It is very helpful to use a wheel for this project, and it'll help put your base right centered in the center of the wheel. Okay, so we have our base on our wheel. We know it's 4 inches diameter. It's 4 inches completely across. So then, throw a little math at you. To figure out the wall, to figure out the height of your mug, you're just going to make it whatever height you want to make your mug. So I'm going to say 4 inches. Okay, you could make it much taller. The one thing I would say is, particularly if you have big hands for this, I mean, you want to be able, if you're really going to drink out of this mug, some people make giant ones and they use them to put their paintbrushes in or pencils or whatever. But if you're really going to use this mug, you don't want it to be too heavy. So you might want to work a little thinner than this. The other thing is, as you're making it, if there are tools you can use instead, but if you want to get your hand in there, don't make the diameter so small that you can't get your hand in there. So for us, 4 inches is going to be fine. I'm going to start way back here, and I'm going to mark off 4 inches, and we'll say that's one end of it. Okay? So this is going to be the height of my mug when we tip it up on its side. I need to know how long to go all the way across. So we're going to take the diameter of the mug times pi to get that number. So I've got a 4-inch diameter times 3.14, which is pi, and that's going to be 12 inches, 0.56. So I'm going to give a little extra. We're just going to trim it off anyway. So I would make sure you have almost 13 inches. As long as you have this number, you should be fine. Okay? So what that is the height of the mug going this way, and this is going to be the circumference of the mug that I'm doing to 12.56. So if I come out from the end of that, and it's going to change probably, but try and get this as square as you can. I'm going to go at least a little further there. Probably going to go to the end and measure that twice. You want to make sure up at the other end that you have 4 inches. Of course, I cut before I did that, but you're going to measure first. And I do. I have a little more than 4 inches at that end, actually, so I could actually come in, make a hatch mark up here. It might end up being a little less than that when we play around with it. Because you have to think about the work you're going to do on it. And it'll stretch. Sometimes it stretches. Sometimes we trim it off if the top's not even. But it's pretty consistent. And then down at the other end, we're going to cut it to 4 inches down here too. Okay, we can take all our pieces off to the side that we may or may not use later when we do the additive stuff. And let's see, I'll put this towards the center. Again, this mug's mighty thick, really. I could thin it out some more, but so I like to put, I've seen people do it on the side, but I like to put my wall on the top of my base because I like to be able to smooth up at the end of it. And you can always thin out your base so that it looks like it's up on a little pedestal. So I'm scoring. I'm going to score the base. Just using this texture tool to do that. You know, we use forks a lot. It kind of depends on what you're doing, how rough you want your scoring to be or how subtle you want your scoring to be. I like to really make sure they're connected, but you definitely want to score. And we're going to use our slip. Now, this has always been a two-man process. I'm here alone right now. You guys are working 6 feet apart, so we're going to wing it. But if you need help, let me know and we'll figure it out. Okay, so I'm trying not to make my mug any narrower anywhere, you know, like too thin on the base. Getting a little thin at that part, but we're going to play with it and fine-tune it later. Okay. You want to make sure your walls stay straight up for this. And I'm going to have excess, and that's okay. But I want to make sure I'm right on the edge of my base. I'll try and do this backwards so you can see. I want to make sure my walls are up as much as they can be, and that they're similar in thickness all the way around, that the sticks were working for me. And then what I do, there are tools that will miter an edge. I'm using my pin tool. What we're going to do, I'm going to try and do it backwards here, is we're going to create our own miter, and that it's going to interlock by overlapping and cutting through both. So I'm not going to go straight like this. I don't want a flat wall or a 90-degree angle here. I want to angle it, and whatever I angle one, I'm angling the other. So they should fit right into each other. And they don't have to be straight, because whatever you're doing to one, you're doing to the other. Oops, I didn't go all the way through as I got down there, because I'm trying to do it backwards. Okay. So then you pull out this part, you pull off this part, gently, oops, I didn't get all the way down there. gently score that up. And you don't want to thin the wall. You don't want to pinch at this point because you don't want your mug to be thinner at that spot. Okay, and just fit them together. Now, can you move this around and stretch it or bend it? Down the road, yes, but let's attempt to make a cylinder this time around. Okay? And like I said, this one's a little on the thick side. So we want to put a little bit of pressure, really join those two together, and then put a little pressure down, really join it to the base. And then I would take a tool and go inside and attach your wall without a lot of squishing. Okay, now this is a wooden angle tool. I don't know if you can see that in here. There's a lag time, so I don't always see what you're seeing when you're seeing it. But I'm smoothing the seam on the inside there. Okay? And I'm going to do that across the top. This isn't our real top, so it's okay if you're a little messy with this. We'll go back in. And I can take and do the same thing on the outside. Now, I'm smoothing on the outside without it getting too thin. I want to do the same thing going up from the base or down, depending on which sticks out more. If your wall is sticking out, you can go down onto your base. If your base is sticking out, you can come up onto your wall. And there's a spot in there. This is another different tool. But I can get a flat cornered edge and press that out just a little bit there so that it's rounder. I'm going to put a coil down there too. But I do want to smooth from the base up the wall, or vice versa. This is where having it on a wheel will really help you. So it's not necessarily going to be all that pretty at this point. But as long as it's securely attached, that's half the battle. And we can put a little base on this as we go. Okay. Let's do the coil next. So for the coil, it doesn't have to be big, but we're almost using it like a piece of tape. We're going to put it in the corner in the inside, and half of it is going to come up onto the wall and half of it's going to go down into the floor. And it can be a little rounded in that corner. It kind of depends on the tool you're using. Now, I could put my hand in there and just do it with my hand. If you've got a smaller diameter or a bigger hand, you can use a tool like this to get in there and kind of push it into place. I would really score it up, slip it up, almost probably all the way around. This is bigger than I need it to be. I'll just sort of pinch the end of it and cut it off wherever I need to do that. That should be enough. I know I need about 12.56 because that's what we measured. Okay, now this clay is nice and soft. It's almost a little too soft, but better that than not soft enough. I'm going to press this down in there. You don't want to create air bubbles, so you need to make sure that you've securely got your coil in there. That just fits right. Got lucky. Pressing. I'm supporting it on the outside so I don't press it all out of shape too much. Making sure it really gets into that corner. I've made my way around. And I will probably use this tool. Supporting it on the outside and dragging up. Now the fact that this is a little rounded and not a point is going to stop it from digging into the clay more. It's very rounded on this side. I mean, I really could be using this side to do it, but I like the edge at the bottom to drag up. Okay. This will help to seal your mug, and it's also going to help to connect the two pieces. But you don't want this to leak. That's part of the criteria for this assignment, is that your mug doesn't leak. Okay, it's not much of a mug if it leaks. Now, you're going to take a little more time than I'm taking. I'm trying to speed through this so that you don't have too much video to watch. So take your time, get it nice and even in there. Take a look at the outside. We can take a sponge. You don't want too wet. And you could put a sponge like with an elastic on the edge of a stick and get it down in there if you needed to. You can also round out the bottom of it if you wanted to at that point. Okay, you can smooth on the whole inside, including your seam. But remember, you want to keep the walls relatively thick. These walls are big enough, thick enough that I could stretch this clay a little bit and, you know, round out the outsides if I wanted to. And if this does get too thin, you could slip and score and smooth and patch from the inside too if you had to, but the goal is not to have to. Alright, so we've got our cylinder. One tool we haven't talked about yet is ribs, and ribs come in all different sizes and shapes and materials. So I like to use a big wooden rib if I'm working on the wheel and I'm throwing a pot. You can get the shape of the bowl and you can alter it and get whatever part of the curve you need. For this particular project, I like to use a thin metal rib because I can bend it to the shape of the outside. If it's kind of messy, I always wet it. Get any excess off of it. The backside of this had old dry clay on it. And you don't want that. You don't want any old dry clay on your board, by the way, when you start rolling out your slab, because it gets stuck into the fresh new clay, and you don't want that. So make sure you're working with a good, clean, flat board. But I can take this and just very gently use the rib to smooth out my sides, make sure they're even, make sure you get a nice smooth surface. Like if you look at that surface right there, it's bumpy. If I go over it with the rib, particularly if it's wet, supporting it inside, put my key in and it'll be all over my smooth sides. Okay. And I'm just cupping this in a way that it follows the contour of the mug. You can stretch your clay a little bit this way too. You can make your wall a little bit taller and your clay a little bit thinner if you play with it enough. Okay, so I would go all the way around. Now, for this particular, I mean, you could do anything. You could put a pattern on there. You could have put a pattern on when you had the flat slab too. It's just a little trickier. You couldn't do this if you did that. But your mug's going to have a theme. So it could be any theme you want. It could be an artistic theme like black and white checkers, or it could be a theme like under the sea, coral reefs and fish. There's been some really amazing creative concepts for that, and yours should incorporate your handle somehow. Okay, so we've got the mug like this now. We can do additive and reductive work on the mug. This might be a good time to show you some of the ones. I'm going to move this for a second. We'll let that firm up a little bit anyway. And I'll show you a couple of the half-done mugs, courtesy of the pandemic. Here's one that got a little further along. You can see that the mug has like waves. She started to glaze it. This sticks out. I don't know if you can see this on the screen or not. This is like a sandy bottom to the ocean, and it sticks out a little more than this does. And then this is carved back more. So you can carve to get depth. Okay, so your sky is back further than your waves, which are back further than your sand. And then she did a, I don't know, like a dolphin or a fish for the handle. Okay, there's the sun over there. She has not finished glazing it yet. This was, I mean, she's probably graduated in college at this point. But at any rate, You have to think about a couple of different sort of logistics and engineering type things when you're doing this. You want to make sure, first of all, we'll get to this, but that your mug is thin enough to drink out of comfortably. You want to make sure that your handle is big enough to get your hand in there to hold it, and that it holds it comfortably. Now, you can get away with it with the little fins on the fish, but it would be more comfortable without them. You also have to be careful that there's not other things sticking up that when you go to drink, it's going to poke you in the eye. Okay, so if you've got a dragon's tail and it's coming up, make sure it's not going to get in the way. Or anything else that comes up and pokes out. Okay, so that's one example. These didn't get to the stage of glazing. Here's another sort of under the sea one. This person, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that, carved fish into the surface. They pressed a fish into the surface that we had as a stamp, and then put a design that was wavy. That's all pressed in, and we'll talk about that. And then the handle, I don't know, it looks like the handle of a mermaid or an eel or something like that. I don't think the shadows are really showing up the surface that much, but you can see the little fish tail down at the bottom here. Okay, let's see what else we've got. We've got a couple more. I'll show you real quickly, just so you get a sense of where we're going. This one has a sort of nature flower sort of theme. There's reductive work where the flowers are carved into the actual clay, okay? And then there's additive work where there's flowers that are tiny, thin little slabs that are added onto the surface, okay? I think it's going to be pretty whited out for you, though. And then the handle is like a vine or that goes to this flower. So you follow the handle around, and it comes out, and then you see that vine kind of working its way around, and there's buds on it. So this one vine has a bunch of different flowers. There's a bud here, and then you see carved in buds in the distance. Okay? This one, same thing as far as the depth goes. You've got the sky, and then there's mountains that literally the sky was carved back out of the mug. The mountains is the thickness that you started with, and then the grasses are carved in and sticking out in the foreground. Okay? And over here you can see a tree. The tree is wrapping up and around and attaching to the left. There's a branch that comes out and attaches to the left and continues over in front of the mountains. And same deal, comes out to the right, and there's more thin little branches. It starts out three-dimensional as the handle. It's three-dimensional here, and then when you get out to the tiny little branches at the end, they're carved in. So that's what I mean by additive and reductive. Okay? So we will take a look at that. Hopefully you can see those in the video. It looks pretty washed out on the screen. Couple tips about this. We do have some tools, and you can press. I would say, let's say that we're going to make mountains, okay? I'm going to make some mountains in the front and some mountains in the back. Now, I am carving with a pen tool, but I'm not going to draw with the pen tool. In the end, you're not going to see thin pen tool lines. I don't ever want to see that. You want to be able to take advantage of the fact that your clay allows you three-dimensional space, even short space, relief work. So I'm drawing the mountain so I know where I want my mountains to be, and just like with a pencil, you can kind of erase because you can just wipe the clay away and do it again if you have to. All right? So there's my mountains. I might do something down lower. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you guys. But what I can do is I can take a tool that's flat press in above that line. Okay, and when I press in above the line, it's going to look like it's further back than the mountain. It's going to imply that the mountain's got some thickness. I'm going to do it over here and then turn it around. Actually, maybe I'll try and come over on that side and show you from there. So if we're doing it here, I would normally have a hand inside, but I don't want to block your view. I would go along that line and just you can drag some of the clay off onto your tool and then just clean it off if you want. And ours is definitely thick enough that we can be doing this. It's going to mess up your top, but that's fine because we can trim it later. But now your mountain is no longer a pin tool line, most importantly. It's sticking out in front of your background, your sky. And it might get a little messy, but we can just smooth it. So, you're implying you can carve to an angle too. Like you could do it this way, carve it away, use the flatness to smooth as you go along. Okay. Now when you get to a place like this, you've got one mountain in front of another mountain. You can do the same thing. I just wet that, by the way. I can come in here and make this mountain look like it's in front of the other mountain. Now I can go back in and do details in my mountains, and the ones that are closer would have more detail, and the ones that are further away would be lighter and less detailed. Okay, so now it appears like this mountain is in front of that mountain, which is in front of that sky. Do the same thing here. And all I'm doing is smoothing, and I'm letting up a little bit as I pull away from that edge till I get to the thickness of the mug the way it was. Okay. So you don't have to do mountains. This would work with anything you're doing and on any project. But that's a quick way to just get a sense of depth without a whole lot of work. And it's way better than just drawing on one level with a pen tool. There are times you want to draw with a thicker tool or a rounder tool, but the pen tool lines will tend to just fade away. Here I'm going to do that so that this mountain looks in front of the other mountain again. Press there, kind of angle it up. So you could do this like a, I don't know, sort of like a nice Chinese brush painting type of look where you know, maybe there's a waterfall or something and a river coming towards you. Or it could be the Rocky Mountains. You could even put a horse in the foreground. You can make that come off and be hilly and have hills that are in front of the mountains, like that. And this clay is thick enough that you don't have to worry too much about that. Okay, that could come down this way. It's getting a little repetitive there, but oops. Okay, so that creates some thickness and some different levels as it is, and you can smooth that with a sponge if there's any areas that aren't so great. If we want to do additive, I don't know, let's say I want to put a tree in there. You can wash your hands off if there's a lot of stuff drying on your hands. Let's see. You don't want it to be too thick. It doesn't really need to be thick at all. Oops, I just cut my tree in half. Maybe here I'm going to just split it up and have some roots. Or here it's going to split into two and go off in different directions as it gets higher. So your tree would be thickest at the base of the trunk and then get thinner as it comes out. And if that was the case, we would want to slip and score again on one side of your tree. Oops, stuck to the table. Maybe right here. It'll make it come up at an angle. Oops. So I'm going to try and do this facing you, but I slipped and scored it. I'm putting my thickness on there. This would be a good thing to do over the seam, actually, because it would just reinforce the seam. If you remember, if you can find your seam and know where it is. Okay. So basically, I'm starting to build that up. I want to make sure I'm supporting it on the inside and pushing it nice and tight so there's no air bubbles in there. This clay is nice and wet for this, so I can still move it around once I get it on there. You also want to think about how wide that's going to be for your lip too. So you don't want to get it too thick right near the top. And then you can carve in with different tools. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that right now, because you get the idea. But then you would build it out. As you get further and further out, you can start to hit the surface pretty evenly and then start to carve. So it could be that as you get out here, it's carved, and up here you get some thickness on there. Maybe we'll put another little branch coming off of those, because you wouldn't have just one branch there. Think texture. Okay, we haven't talked a lot about texture, but where you're doing the reductive work, it's the perfect opportunity to create the texture of bark in a tree, or the texture of scales on a fish, or a snake. A snake would be an easy one to do for a handle if that was, your theme had to do with reptiles or nature, and you had a picture that was tall grasses could have a snake coming out of it, or something like that. Okay, so be consistent with the texture. Make sure it looks like it's three-dimensional and it's forward of your mountains, which is forward of your sky, and so on. Okay, and then as it comes out here, you can even use a little slip just to create the texture of the branches where you're carving, and push it around with a tool. Okay, just be very careful that you don't get any air bubbles there. It doesn't have to be thick to be three-dimensional or to be additive. And then down at the bottom, I would probably put some grasses or bushes or something. Just to show foreground. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be added on. You can leave it kind of rough. I'm just using the same tool I used to slip at the moment because it was handy. Alrighty. So, a couple of things that usually I have somebody else in here to help with. Somebody usually spins the wheel. It's doable on one person. We're going to find out anyway. You want to make your lid, your top opening nice and even once you finish all the work on the sides, and you're sure you're done pushing the clay around. You want to have a nice even top and bottom. Okay, I'm going to cut to the chase with that. I'm not going to make it as neat as I would if I were really finishing this mug up. One thing you can do is anchor your elbow pick a height that you want it to be. So you need to go to at least the lowest point. Okay? The lowest part of your mug. And first time around, I would draw it. And I try and spin as evenly as you can. So I'm not going all the way through the clay. I'm just marking where I want that to be cut off. And my elbow is anchored and my hand is frozen in space. Okay? So the wheel is turning, but the height isn't changing because my hand isn't moving. Second time around, I'm just carving deeper and getting right in there. Okay, so that gives me a nice flat edge. It's too thick. I would not make it quite this thick, and we're going to play with that. The other thing you can do, if you want to, is take your angle tool. You can hold it at all different angles. But you can get in there. I'm going to do it, just have a little tiny one here. I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm going to build just a little bit of a foot on here. Probably not even as thick as the clay. But just raise it up a little bit. Okay? That takes away a little bit of the bulk. And just neatens it up. For the top, I would have a wet sponge, very carefully squeeze as you go around, maybe more than once. Squeeze the edges. This is also helpful with somebody else holding the wheel. And take off that hard corner. Okay? And when you get rid of that, I'm just squeezing consistently all the way around. And that's going to make it more comfortable to put your lips against it, for one thing. Particularly over there. Okay? You can do a second round of that if you think it needs to be squeezed a little more. Alright. Now, if we were making normal mugs, I would probably tell you to pull the handle, and I would show you how to pull a handle. In this case, your mug might be a dolphin, it might be a snake, it could be a tree, it could be anything. So I'm going to include a video that shows a lot of different ways, not one that I made. I think his name is John the Potter, actually. But it's a nice video that shows different ways to make a handle. Okay? If you were making a normal handle, you would pull it, leave it to firm up a little bit, kind of in the shape you want it to be. Decide where your halfway point is. I would probably, for this one, you would make sure that however you want your handle to attach to your mug, I'm going to have to move around again, I think. However you want your handle to attach to your mug, you want to make sure you have a good surface there. So this is just a normal handle, but you can make your handle tree-shaped, or make the branches come off or whatever. Let's put it opposite that tree. So I can have it come down this way and attach on the inside. I could have it come this way and fade in here. There's a lot of different ways, but you want to make sure you have enough surface to attach. So let's say, so leave it a little thicker than you have to. I think the bottom, I'm going to just attach it that way. And then the top, I'm going to have it curl around and in. Okay? Then you would score it. Score where it's going. Let's say we're putting it right across from that tree, so go down here, which is pretty scored anyway. And then the top, I'm going to score here. And slip. Make sure it's directly above. And just press. You want to hold it on the inside to press, making sure that you have a big enough space for your hand to go in there. Okay. this I'm just going to smooth out. I might have to fine tune my mountains again if there's a mountain under there, which there probably is. Maybe I'll just carve in with my fingernail as I go and smooth. Okay. It helps to have this be kind of leather hard and a little bit firmer. Okay, and I might actually stretch that a little bit to make it thinner and a little wider. And then here, I'm just going to press in and press off to the sides, and then I'll fix the grass that's down there. Okay? Then you want to make sure when you leave this, if you leave it out to dry, that it's exactly the way you want it to be. Okay? You've carved away any excess little nubbies. You have got your handle big enough to get your hand in there, and it's smooth. I would fix the grasses in this case, and the little foot, because I kind of messed with it a little bit as I was putting the handle on there. And you can use the little nubbies that come from fixing it to make more grasses if you want to. Just make them consistent. I'll just use the different tool and look a little thick. So that handle is coming out of that. Okay, I could make it a branch. I could do all sorts of things with it. Okay. So, for now, that's what you're going to do. We'll learn how to do lids and make flanges, and you can do bigger cylinder shapes or rounder shapes as we move forward. We're going to do coils when we move forward. Maybe we'll do lids with those. But for now, those are the basics. You would fine tune it, get it just the way you like it, put it in the kiln room for it to be fired. Make sure that there's no air bubbles, and everything is exactly the shape you want it to be. Okay? If you have any questions, you can always get me through Google Classroom or through email. So have a great day, and I can't wait to see your mugs when you're done.